Welcome to this episode of the Iowa Beef Collective TV. I'm your host, Patrick Wall, and here with us today we have Dr. Randie Culbertson, the ISU Extension and Outreach cow-calf specialist. I still feel like you're new, but you've been here a little while. So let's just dig right into it and just tell us about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got to Iowa State.
Yeah, so like you said, I still consider myself to be a little bit on the new side. So I've been here for about 2.5 years now. I grew up in New Mexico. My family had a cow-calf operation where I spent my childhood and got my bachelor's degree at New Mexico State. Went to Colorado, did a little bit of a, sidestep into horses for a little while, so don't hold that against me. And then went back to school, got my graduate degrees at Colorado State in animal breeding and genetics. And then from there, I went to the American Simmental Association and International Genetic Solutions, where I was their lead geneticist for 3 years. That was in Bozeman, Montana. And I moved from there to here at Iowa State.
So talk a little bit about what you do here on a daily basis. You have a teaching and extension and research appointment. So that wears a lot of hats. That's kind of how we hire people here now. So tell us about what the three pillars of what you do here.
Just depending on the day kind of tells me where I'm going. So I've got an extension appointment, research, and teaching. So obviously during the school semester, I teach the senior level capstone beef systems management class. I co-teach that. I teach the cow-calf portion, and in the past it was co-taught with Dan Loy. I'm now currently teaching it with Dathan Smirchek, and then with our new director of the Beef Center coming in, she will be coming in to start teaching the feedlot portion of that class. I teach that in the spring and the fall semesters. And outside of that, as far as extension goes, the Iowa Beef Center team, they keep me pretty busy. They run me all over the state. If there's an extension event, I'm there trying to give a talk, anything with cow-calf. I try to stay focused on the repro side and the genetics side. We've got some great nutritionists that I feel like are going to do 10 times a better job about talking about nutrition than I am. So I let them handle that, and I kind of cover everything else. And as far as research goes, I've got a couple of projects going on. I inherited the McNay breeding project, so I'm working on that and getting some projects going there. My grad students are predominantly working on that information, and then I'm also involved with a collaborative group looking at grazing cattle on CRP. So we're looking at a bunch of aspects on that, looking at wildlife, interaction with wildlife, soil health, water quality, and forage quality and plant diversity in that. So this is the first year that we have cattle out grazing on CRP, and it's a 5-year study, so stay tuned. Hopefully we'll have some good results from that.
Let's dig into the McNay projects a little more, because I don't think, even though it's been there a long time, I don't think a lot of folks understand what that research herd is. They stemmed from what I used to call the R line and the Q line. Clear back at the beginning of carcass ultrasound, they selected one line of Angus cattle for ribeye area only, one line of Angus cattle for quality grade or IMF, intermuscular fat only. Most of the R line is gone. The Q line, when the Rhodes farm closed, transitioned to McNay. And they've essentially, up until recently, been a completely closed herd genetically, no outside sources. So talk about what genetics have been infiltrated and what projects are ongoing now, because that herd is sort of, not drastically, but significantly changed over the last 5 years from what they traditionally were.
Yeah, so you gave great history of the McNay herd. It has been, the breeding project where I stepped in, basically they'd been selecting pretty heavily for marbling. And that herd, they proved that you can do it. So that herd, we see our kill sheets, we retain ownership on all those calves, we get the carcass data back. What we see is they on average, go about 30% prime, almost all choice and prime. We very rarely have a select in those calves. So definitely proved the point that you can select for marbling. Now the question is, do we take it in a different direction? And that's kind of where I'm stepping in, and we're looking at the historical data. They have been a closed herd. Inbreeding, though, they did a great job of kind of maintaining that inbreeding and keeping it relatively low. So, other questions I would like to ask is kind of looking more on the female side of things. Can we use technologies to select to improve reproductive efficiency of our females and also maybe hopefully maintain that carcass quality as we go forward to do that? So, in the meantime, we've got some other smaller projects going on. We just did a heifer development project where we looked at using carcass measurements. So, using ultrasound to measure ribeye, back fat, and marbling to see if that affects or has any association with heifer pregnancy. What we found is the good news is marbling doesn't seem to affect a heifer's ability to get pregnant, which was good. Also, the same thing with ribeye. So, a heifer that's putting on more muscle, we're not seeing that hinder her so much. But we do see that back fat can be a big indicator for heifer pregnancy. On a physiological side, that makes sense. But could we maybe use this to do a little bit better job of selecting our heifers or looking for that more efficient heifer as she develops that's going to be able to get pregnant? So that was just a project that was funded by the Iowa Beef Industry Council. And so now we're just kind of moving forward looking at reproduction and how can we improve that on that herd. So really taking the herd in a different direction. We've been bringing in some outside genetics for use in AI and just trying to improve kind of we tend to, most of those calves go a yield grade 2, so we're trying to see if we can improve that a little bit, get some bigger cattle finishing out in the feedlot.
And I think, that herd in and of itself is probably one of the most unique herds in the world. We did a cow study there a few years ago. We found 8-year-old cows that scanned with prime marbling. Most folks would said that's not even possible. A cow that's had 6 calves should never have that much marbling left. So I think there's physiologically a lot of things we can still learn there that we don't know. So hopefully, you and the group here at the Iowa Beef Center are successful at taking that herd in new directions and figuring out maybe what we can learn that maybe the questions haven't even been asked yet. So good stuff there. I want to back up a little bit and just talk about how do you go from New Mexico cow-calf person to the current heat and humidity of Iowa. What's been the biggest transition from where you started to where you are now?
Well, the humidity's killing me. So there's that. So yeah, it's a different mindset when you're out west. You're used to wide open spaces, basically. The running joke that I tell people is I was very used to BLM land. And when I got here, went to my first couple of cattlemen's meeting, I was in the back Googling what the heck CRP was, because that was completely foreign to me. And I've had to transition the thought process. Out west, our major restrictions are going to be feed resources and predominantly water. Especially in New Mexico. New Mexico's monsoonal. It's not uncommon to get no moisture and no rain from pretty much March all the way to about the first week of July. Then I come here to Iowa, and like I said, the humidity is killing me. My first winter, I've never been so cold because of humidity. So it's a transition. And the biggest mindset for me that I've had to transition for is that the major resource constraint here in Iowa is actually land utilization. We have a big restriction here in Iowa for land use. So we have feed, we have water. So how do cow-calf producers specifically handle the fact that we don't have as much land as what we see out west? And so a different dynamic, we can have more cattle on the land that we have than you would compared to out west. But there becomes challenges if we have a drought, something like that. How do you mitigate those drought situations here in Iowa? It's a different conversation to have.
How different are the cows? You've been in enough herds, I think, here in Iowa by now.
The cows here, they're bigger. So like I said, land resources, the utilization here is just different. So we tend to see, on average, some bigger cows, depending on the herds I go to. There's still some herds that I would say are a little bit more moderate framed, but it just depends on where I go. So we tend to see larger cows. A lot more focus is placed on those calves in the feedlot. We feed a lot of cattle here in Iowa, so it makes sense to have that, to put that pressure on it. And I think it's an ongoing debate that we see in the industry and the conversation on the research side of what's our most optimal cow. Do we put selection pressure on growth, that's going to make our mature cow size bigger. What's that utilization for feed? If we've got readily available feed, maybe it's not a big deal, could be a bigger deal if we've got more constraints in feed. And those are questions I think that we just keep diving into. Is that big cow, is she going to be viable here in Iowa? Or could it be potentially putting a little bit of a strain on our resources? Don't know. I think it's still an open question that we need to dive a little further into.
I'm going to switch gears on something that you haven't mentioned yet. We just got back from BIF, 2 weeks ago? And a lot of the program was beef on dairy. It's a hot area for research. The folks listening probably don't know that you've been virtually all over the world talking about beef on dairy. And I think when you started this gig, you probably didn't envision that that's what you were going to be talking about.
Nope.
So tell the audience kind of what you've been doing, where you've been, and the interest in beef on dairy.
Yeah, it's not virtually all over the world. I have literally been all over the world. So last summer I went to Bled, Slovenia to give a talk to a bunch of more of a dairy-focused meeting about the U.S. beef industry and what we're seeing with beef on dairy. And then this last spring, I was down in Australia giving a similar talk. Again, my audience has been predominantly a dairy audience. But what I found is the first time I gave that talk to a group of dairymen, I thought, well, make sure you have my getaway car ready at the door because I'm just going to call it like I see it. And instead, they ate it up and were like, all right, they were very interested to hear about that aspect because, the dairymen, what we're seeing is that they are breeding these beef on dairy, but those calves leave their farm at a day or two old, and then it's not their problem anymore. And where we're seeing a large level of abscesses, liver abscesses in these beef on dairy crosses, and we really need some answers as to why that's occurring. And is it management? Is it genetic? Can we make some alterations to help improve that? It's really it's a problem for everybody. It's not just the beef industry, but dairymen need to be aware of that as well. And so that's been a lot of the conversations. Australia was interesting. They're really struggling. They can't really get the beef on dairy off the ground, so to speak. And there's a lot of conversations of what they do with day-old calves because they don't really have calf ranches like we have here where these calves can go be raised, developed, and go into the feedlot. So Australia was very interesting, those conversations. But yeah, here in the U.S., and we also don't have a lot of answers on the genetic component of that. What's that heterosis between the beef on dairy calves? As far as the liver abscesses go, some preliminary work has shown that it's probably not a genetic aspect to it. It's probably mainly management, and probably right now it's indicating early calf development. But the data that's been used to come up with those estimates have been predominantly native beef breeds. So we don't know if the combination of that beef on dairy could contribute to it. And again, it would be helpful to know, is this management or is there a genetic component to it? So a lot of work that needs to be done. Also, who are our best beef bulls to be used in those dairies to be generating those calves? So a lot of unknowns that we're trying to tackle from a research standpoint.
And I think the beef industry needs to be aware that the semen companies are actually purchasing bulls explicitly for mating dairy cows. And that's something new that we haven't ever even encountered.
Right.
But every single one of the studs is putting several bulls in there destined for that market. And those bulls are very different than what the mainstream beef industry wants.
Exactly.
I do think that we're going to learn a lot in the next 5 years on how to feed these things, parallel to the Wagyu Akaushi stuff. We feed those cattle very differently than we did 10 years ago, and they're a lot better. And one thing that I do think we need to mention is we're in a downturn in the cow cycle. We're starting to go back up. Growth seems to be slow at the price level we're at. And I've heard a lot of talk, well, this beef on dairy thing is going to help us bridge that gap. Well, all those dairy cows were hopefully going to have a calf anyway. So we're putting a few more pounds of beef on, conception rate's a little better. We don't lose as many calves, early embryonic death, that type thing. So, is it producing a few more calves than we would traditionally get? Yes. Are there a few more pounds of beef? Yes. But they're not probably the be all end all that maybe some folks hope they are.
Right. I mean, the dairy herd size, it is the size that it is,
Hmm.
right? So historically, it's contributed anywhere from 16 to 20% of our total beef product going through. Now, that percentage gets a little bit bigger as the beef herd shrinks a little bit. But if we look at it numerically, there's only a limited number of calves that are beginning to be coming out of that dairy supply, just because of the limitation of how many females are in that dairy herd to provide that. What has changed is it's not the supply itself. What's changed is the genetic makeup of those calves.
Hmm.
So, like you said, now we're putting on more pounds on those calves that are producing a little more, more product, and hopefully, and I shouldn't say more product, but a better product. Their yield grades have gone down. So, rather than being average 3.4, now we're seeing them in the 3.2s. And as we get a better understanding of what crosses really work, I think we'll see improvements in that as we go forward. So,
And I know the panel at BIF, the Jersey breeder had a much different take on it than the Holstein breeder did. And, we there was a lot of talk about portion size. We're taking carcasses bigger. They don't have to worry about that on a Jersey half blood beef animal. They're a much more friendly portion size. Steaks don't have to be cut as thin, or we don't have to cut them in half,
right.
or get creative. So there's some aspects of it that have a real advantage for the packer as well. And right now, the Packers looking for anything they can possibly get their hands on, that they can market. A good friend of mine at Greater O just talked to him last week, and he said the Jersey half blood is really their bread and butter right now as far as profitability from their end. Which, a few years ago we were pretty upset with the Packers, and now the tables have turned, and they're doing things that they haven't traditionally done either. So, unique aspect of the industry. I think the research area will continue. It's just kind of in its infancy, probably.
And
Uh,
there's been a lot of change. Even I'd say in the last 5 years, the amount of change in feeders feeding our beef on dairy calves has changed drastically.
yep,
So again, like you said, the semen companies, I mean, that is their bread and butter. And let's be honest, the dairy industry is going to be buying more semen, and they always will be compared to the beef
correct.
breeds or the beef industry. So makes sense that the semen companies are finding these bulls to market these bulls. That's their business model. So we've seen drastic changes in a very short amount of time, and I think that's going to continue to accelerate.
Agreed. I want to just kind of talk about a segment of your career before you got to Iowa State, and that was with IGS and Simmental. What projects did you work on? There was some pretty groundbreaking stuff genetically that happened while you were there. What specifically did the group work on? What sort of come out of that, and the whole IGS development, and what they do, when you started versus what they do now, which is a lot of the breeds.
Yeah, so just to kind of back up, what is IGS? So IGS is International Genetic Solutions, and it is a collaboration or partnership of multiple breed associations, and it is a multi-breed genetic evaluation. So prior to that, typically every breed association ran their own genetic evaluation, and it was all within their breed. The multi-breed evaluation now brings in all of these breeds together and looks at, combining that data. And it's also great if you've got commercial crossbred cattle, you can now get genetic evaluation done on those herds because we now have a tool that's capable of doing that. While I was at IGS, what they kind of put online was using some machine learning in part of the evaluation as a way of trying to account for some of, whenever you work with field data, it sometimes is a little messy. And you'd much rather include that information, but find a way that that messiness can be accounted for to kind of clean it up, so to speak. And so they implemented some machine learning to help with that. And I did a lot of the testing for that to make sure it was working the way we expected it to work, and kind of looking to say, hey, we're going to have some changes coming down the road. This is what we need to be looking out for, and to make sure it worked and didn't cause a major disruption to that evaluation. Another thing while I was there was the implementation of beef on dairy data that came into that evaluation. So the beef industry, we struggle from a genetic improvement standpoint, is that our end product is beef, and that is our least reported phenotype into a genetic evaluation is carcass data. And anybody who's tried to retain ownership and get that carcass data back, it's not always easy. You have to check a few more boxes to get that information back. So reporting that back to the evaluation has always been a struggle for all of the beef breeds. Beef on dairy coming in, it doubled the number of carcass records that we had in the evaluation just in 1 week. And so it brings in a huge amount of information, and then that helps everybody in the evaluation, because now we're getting that information back, increases our accuracy of prediction, and just overall improves our ability to make a prediction for what our actual end product is in the beef industry. And another thing, too, that I looked at was what's the connectivity. So we have a lot of small breeds that would go into IGS, and what's the benefit for them. And so our smaller breeds, what we found as being part of IGS and the connectivity across all these breed associations, is that it could increase the amount of information for those smaller breed associations by over 30 times. So if you are a member of a smaller breed association, without being that part of that collaboration, you were kind of limited to the amount of information that could be used to generate genetic predictions. Being part of that, now suddenly you've increased that by 30-fold. So that's a big improvement. How does that help you if you're the producer at home? Well, suddenly you've got more tools and better tools at your disposal to making genetic improvement and moving that needle forward. So,
And I think, in the beef industry, our Achilles heel is we're not vertically integrated.
right,
And 99% of the producers would tell you that's what they enjoy, is not being vertically integrated like the chicken and pork and
right,
other industries. One of the things we can take advantage of on beef on dairy is the vertical integration of the cow side. We've never had that before.
right,
So, to say that we've doubled carcass data in a week, that's huge. We've been collecting carcass data for 50 years.
right.
So, we can ultrasound all we want. That's still a good form, and most breeds would say that, over 95% of their data is ultrasound, which is great. But to get that much carcass data on an AI sire is huge. So
Exactly. Yep.
it'd be fun to see where that goes. I don't have a scripted way we're going to go to end this, but I do want to ask you one last question. And
Oh, now I am worried.
and that is, you've been here just 2.5 years. Let's look down 5, 10, 15 years from now. What's your magic bullet? What do you want to work on that you haven't yet?
Oh, geez. I don't know if I had enough coffee to answer this question. I love working with the McNay herd. I think that I'm really excited to see where we can take that. Precision livestock farming is becoming a bigger topic. So, question of, are there technologies out there that we can utilize to help production, right? And that's kind of generalized. But really, my goal as being the cow-calf extension specialist is, my end goal is, I'm not the researcher who's coming up with the theories and all of that. I want to take those theories and put them to work. And so I want to say, okay, well, we've got these technologies out there. Can we actually use them and see a benefit for it that we can use at an industry level and at the producer level? And we're in an interesting time right now, especially in the beef industry. We have these technologies coming online. We're seeing it used in pork and in poultry, and also in dairy. but the application of it specifically on the cow-calf can be a little bit challenging for multiple reasons. And so I'm hoping that we can kind of use that to like basically how can we take these technologies and make them applicable to the industry. So those are kind of some exciting things. And like I said, working with the McNay herd it's like the icing on the cake for me at the end of the day. So
It is a fun herd to get to utilize. It's like I said, it's unique to anywhere else in the world. So I think we're really fortunate to have that resource, and hopefully the resource continues to maintain the size of the herd it is. And that McNay farm it's large. They do a lot of forage work there. They do a lot of agronomy stuff as well. So hopefully we can continue to find some funding sources to keep us moving forward. But I want to thank you for coming on with me. We've got a series of on-campus folks we're going to interview here in the coming episodes, but it's been a blast working with you. We have a lot of fun. And
yeah, I paid Patrick a lot of money to say that.
we enjoy the beef team is a good group. We're diverse, but we're pretty unified on what we think we need to do as an extension group. So thanks for coming on. And thank you, folks, for joining us on this episode of the Iowa Beef Collective TV. Keep tuning in. We'll keep educating you from a new avenue here on the Iowa Beef Collective. Thanks for joining us.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/legal.